Throughout history, there have only been a handful of games that you can say truly revolutionized gaming. And Resident Evil 4 is certainly one of those games. Capcom took a bold step in completely overhauling the perspective in this series, and nailed it so well that pretty much every third-person game afterwards is a copycat. Your favorite game's favorite game is probably Resident Evil 4. Like within 3 years of the game coming out, we had gotten Resident Evil 4 but badass, Resident Evil 4 but in space, and Resident Evil 4 in the jungle. Now, you don't need me to stand here and tell you how great Resident Evil 4 is, okay? With the thousands of 10 out of 10 review scores, the million video essays on YouTube. I'm pretty sure you all know how amazing this game is, right? I mean, there's been as many ports as Skyrim. They got this bad boy running on an iPhone 3G. It sucked. But what I do want to talk about today is how addicting the combat is, and how Capcom perfected the formula in one try, creating a masterpiece of violent gaming that seems simple on the outside, but is incredibly complex under the hood. Leon Kennedy, the guy that can outrun a boulder, triple somersault, and suplex a grown man with ease, but can't walk sideways. These are the infamous tank controls that early Resident Evil games are known for, and is one of the biggest points of contention in judging how well Resident Evil 4 has aged. You see, there's two types of Resident Evil 4 players. There's the ones that go back and play it like every Christmas because it's one of their favorite games ever. And then there's the ones that go back and play it because it's been in their backlog for years, and they kind of drop it after the first level because they realize the controls are so awkward, they gotta make this highly trained US secret soldier do a 3-point turn. But I can test the idea that these tank controls are outdated. And in fact, they're one of the main reasons why Resident Evil 4 is such a fantastic game. And it just, as time goes on, it just ages like the finest of wines. It may seem like a fault of just early 2000s game design, but it's actually a very deep and very well thought out gameplay system that keeps you on the edge of your seat the entire time. You see, every aspect, from the boss battles, the level design, all of it is balanced around these tank controls. And what better way to analyze them than to use the very first and one of the most famous levels in all of gaming, the village. The very first enemy in the game has a one-handed weapon. He's just walking toward you with no regard for his life. And what you have to do as Leon is plant yourself in a position and shoot him while he's coming at you. And then after that, you go down the trail, you practice this on about 7 or 8 more enemies until you're met with a village full of enemies. There's no going around it, there's no running away from it, there's no timer, no kill count. You must just fight all of these villagers until the game says you can stop. This is where the game teaches you about the cornerstone of combat: commitment. To have Leon ground himself and start firing is to commit to a combat scenario at the risk of being attacked by enemies. Now, the village, in my opinion, is a genius first level. For newcomers, it's possibly one of the hardest levels in the entire game. There will be 7 or 8 enemies coming at you at all times, and all you can do as Leon is plant yourself in a position and fire at them. With this tank movement in mind, you have to know where you want to go and what you want to do when you get there, because doing all this turning around, moving shit, it wastes so much precious time, and those enemies are always coming at you no matter what. You must understand what you want to happen, and you have to think one step ahead at all times, or else you're gonna die. I sort of think of Resident Evil 4's combat as like real-time chess in a way. I know that sounds weird, but it's like every action you take with Leon is a speculative risk with either a reward or a consequence, and you must always think one step ahead to come out on top. These tank controls always give the game a feeling of tension, despite Leon being such a powerful person. He's a fucking US secret agent, right? He can do these crazy flips and fucking X Games tricks, right? If you were able to do all that in the game, it simply wouldn't be hard. The constant loop of deciding whether you need to take another shot or if you need to reposition because enemies are getting too close is just a unique layer of strategy that the modern run and gun Resident Evil really isn't able to capture. It keeps things fresh and engaging, and it adds a layer of anxiety that runs through your head during every encounter. Everything feels so much more dangerous, just with the fact that Leon has limited locomotion, because everything is trying to kill you at all times. But we haven't even touched on how the bosses play into this game design, right? Because from the very first level, you're met with Leon's ultimate antithesis, Dr. Salvador. a villager wielding a chainsaw that has double the walk cycle of villagers. His attack is brutally insta-kill, right? And it takes a massive amount of damage just to even stagger him. Leon can't dodge him, he can't block him, he can't parry him, and Leon's backpedal speed is the same as Salvador's walk cycle. And with knowing that Leon needs to ground himself to shoot, this fight becomes majorly stressful, where every single pull of the trigger is one less sliver of health on Salvador, but one step closer to Leon's brutal death. And this isn't even mentioning the dozens of other villagers that are coming at you as you're trying to fucking handle this guy. Having to juggle Ganados while Dr. Salvador is just inching his way closer to ripping your head off is absolute chaos. The perfect contrast of chaotic danger and calculated attacks. The game design version of an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object. It's fucking genius. This limited mobility of Resident Evil 4 keeps the game fair and balanced. But balance has to go both ways. And just how Leon is slow and brooding, so too are the enemies, which honestly are kept a little stupid to keep the game fair. You see, the enemy design in Resident Evil 4 is what separates the old Resident Evil from the not so old Resident Evil. One zombie is extremely dangerous and almost unkillable in RE1 and 2. But in Resident Evil 4, the Ganados are insanely fucking easy to kill. So there's pretty much no tension there. But what if the game throws 5 at you? Or 10? Or 15? Resident Evil 4 kind of broke that mold of traditional Resident Evil game design of, atmosphere and helplessness. Leon is simply a badass that is being overrun at every given moment. Even though you got some powerful ass weapons and some sick ass roundhouse kicks, you're constantly under pressure of being outnumbered by them. We've established that Leon is a tank, right? So the way the Ganados move plays on that. There's like a subtle rhythm to the way the enemies move. See, when you do enter combat, enemies will typically give you like a 4-step buffer before they stop running and start just walking towards you. Their walk is just slow enough to give you time to attack, but just fast enough to where you can't just, fucking sit there and think about it for 30 minutes like chess. You've really only got like a 2-second window to make a move on a Ganado before they attack you. But no matter what, in any scenario, they're going to come directly at you, which is both a positive and a negative. This makes the game virtually all offense and no defense, right? It's like just two trains barreling at each other. If they all simply attacked you at once, the game would be impossible to play. I mean, hell, 2 or 3 attacks will kill Leon. So what this game does is add a cooldown to attacks. See, when a Ganado hits you, they'll take a step back and kind of reset their position, right? So this gives you like a 3.5-second window before they start coming back at you again, essentially allowing for only one Ganado to rush you at a time. Really the name of the game with these tank controls is just balance, right? There's so much balance. I think it's just a genius game design. But there's something even deeper about this combat design that makes it perfect. Just something so innate and ethereal with the pacing of this combat that separates it from everything else just to make it so beautiful. Like a mechanical watch, right? There's a deep level of controllable timing of the flow of actions and reactions of Leon versus the enemies, where every action has a unique set of time around it that can be truly perfected in like every single aspect. You see, Resident Evil 4's combat is finite. And no, I don't mean the game being finite, right? Because of course it is. It's only like 6 hours long. I mean finite in the sense that it has like a set amount of actions, reactions, animations that make it predictable. It's an assembly line of choices and consequences that can be reacted to and perfected simply because you understand every little detail of it. I'm not saying the game is meant to be played forever, right? But it's kind of like riding a bike. Every enemy type has a specific amount of actions and reactions associated with them, and each new level offers a more complex structure of actions, keeping the game fresh and non-monotonous despite being so predictable. I know that sounds weird, it sounds like it doesn't make any sense, but we're gonna get into it, okay? It's gonna make sense in just a second. Let's start with the timing of enemy attacks. For a villager using a bladed one-handed weapon, their attack is about a 63rd of a second, making it one of the fastest attacks in the game. The important thing to note about one-armed attacks from villagers is that they can actually throw their weapons if you're between 10 to 15 steps away from them. And not only that, but they have an infinite amount stuffed in their pants. The cultists are a bit slower. They use morning stars as their main one-handed weapons.
These attacks are around 9/10 of a second long, but more dangerous than the axe swing. The Islanders incorporate both the axe and the Morningstar into their arsenal, as well as a cattle prod, which is not only the most dangerous one-handed attack in the game, but the second fastest at 0.8 of a second. For two-handed weapons, the Villager has around a 1.12 second attack, but this is by far the weakest two-hand attack in the game since it's a thrust attack, giving it no range whatsoever and being easy to dodge. The Cultist two-handed is a little bit trickier. They have a giant scythe with nearly the same attack speed at 1.11 seconds, but has a full 180-degree range of motion. There's only one attack a Ganado can do when they're unarmed, and that's the lunge they'll do to choke you out. They'll run at you for 5 or 6 steps, totaling about 1.9 seconds, which is just a little bit quicker than Leon's backpedal when at green health. This makes them one of the most high priority targets when dealing with a large group, as they can lock you into a damage animation that can lead to some pretty devastating consequences, but can also be helpful in a pinch, since the successful QTE can knock down anyone nearby. See, Cultists and Islanders are equipped with crossbows, making their ranged attacks extremely deadly and have way more velocity than the Villagers just throwing their weapons. They typically take between 1.45 and 2 seconds after aiming to shoot, and it's best to dispatch the crossbows first to save the annoyance of getting locked into damage animations, which can be piled on.
But enemy timing is only one piece of this massive pie, right? Because Leon also has his own timetable that he works on that keeps the game running like fucking clockwork. And now as for the attacks, we'll start with the headshots. See, there's 2 types of headshot reactions. The first one being a front lunge, which is extremely quick at only like
1.8 seconds.
But it closes a lot of distance between you and the Ganado, lining it up nicely for a roundhouse kick. The second is a blowback attack, which offers a crazy like 3.5 second reaction time. This one's a personal favorite of mine because it gives Leon some much needed space. Now, as for the legs, shooting an enemy in the leg will have one of 4 reactions. The first being just a simple knockback with almost no time given, right? I fucking hate this one. Whenever I see this one, it pisses me off. The second one, they start holding their leg in pain and screaming, right?
This gives you about 2.6 seconds.
Now, there's the one that I like, where if you shoot them in the right spot, they'll drop on their knees.
You'll get 2.11 seconds of reaction time.
Now this one you can line up for a suplex. And the last one finally is just a full-on drop to the ground. Now speaking of drops, no matter what happens, if an enemy drops, you've got about 7.5 seconds until they fully get up and start their walk cycle again. And be careful, because if you attack them while they're on the ground, it'll cancel that timer and then they'll immediately get up. So don't shoot an enemy on the ground unless you absolutely have to. That, once again, goes back to the point of committing to doing whatever you're doing. If you shoot an enemy on the ground and you don't mean to, you just fucked up and you just broke their timetable. And you know, we talked a lot about this timetable stuff, and you know, the most important thing out of all this is positioning. Let's go back to the very first level, the village level, and we're gonna use the shotgun for example. As I said previously in the section about commitment, that little fucking pea shooter of a pistol doesn't do shit, right? So you're always having to move around and reposition. You're trying to create space by running around, you plant yourself, you shoot Ganados until it gets too hot, then you rinse and repeat. But you walk into this house, right? You get this shotgun in the most confined building in the entire village. There's a direct change of pacing now with this shotgun, where instead of not letting them get too close and using crowd control, you actively wait for a group to get way closer than what is comfortable so you can blast them all away with just one shotgun blast. Are you starting to see now? Like, the level design is simply perfect. You know, it allows itself to be taken advantage of, and all these systems of timing and tank controls and everything just works together to create this masterpiece of combat. And timing doesn't just stop at just like animations and stuff. It's a direct, tangible statistic in this game. Unlike a lot of other third-person games where timing is just regulated to fire rate being good or bad, everything in this game is a direct, timeable statistic that can be calculated and taken advantage of, as proven by reloading speed, which turns out to be one of the most important statistics in this game. It might not seem like a lot, right? But that first shotgun upgrade of 3.03 seconds to 2.43 seconds saved my ass more times than I can count. But hey, you know, most people aren't a fucking weirdo like me and, you know, meticulously count the frames it takes for every animation, right? Most people play the game, you know, normally. And that's where audible and visual cues come in. We go back to this word finite, right? What does finite mean? It means a set amount of something. And the concept of finite relates to the audible and visual cues in the way that the game doesn't really have much variety to it. But that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. And let's get into it. From the exact moment you start chapter 1-2, you instinctively know what the hell is going on and what you have to do in the combat. Every enemy type makes the exact same sound when being shot in the head, right? And they're also going to play one of those two reaction types, and the same amount of distance will be created or taken away depending on which reaction it is, and it'll always be the same amount of time no matter what. And I know for a stone cold fact that when I hear this sound, I will be able to run up to him and roundhouse kick him every single time. And if I can't hear it, I can see the animation playing. Now extrapolate this thought process to every single animation type, whether it be lighting them on fire, shooting them in the shoulder, shooting them in the leg. No matter what, this applies to every single type. The fact that the combat system is so lean and simplified makes it to where it can be memorized and perfected. It allows me to get into this MK Ultra level hypnotized flow state where I'm just killing Ganados all day, not even thinking about it, simply because I understand what is going to happen at every single moment. Moment to moment action is just one part of, gaming the game in a sense. The ambient cues in the background is what really gets that flow state of combat going. It's little things that you see and hear and understand in the back of your head, yet don't necessarily have to think about. Like when a Ganado is shot to the ground and puts their hand up when they die and makes that grunting noise. You already know that person is dead, right? As opposed to them laying on the ground, staying still and not melting, which already lets you know that they are not dead without having to think about it. Or of course, as I mention all the time, blowing their head off and getting that visceral, crunchy, watery sound and seeing them still walking, that lets you know, okay, he might have a parasite coming out of his head. You don't really know, right? Well, actually you do know, because if an enemy is dead, your laser sight is not going to stop on them, it's going to go through them. So if a laser sight is going through them, you know they're not going to have the parasite come out. Hearing the groans of getting up off the ground behind you, the grunt of aiming a crossbow at you, the splashes an invisible Novistador makes on the ground when it's walking, a parasite Ganado stopping in their place when they're about to swing at you, the cultist chants letting you know they're slowly walking their way towards you. There's so many just little examples of a game creating an understanding of what needs to be done in the moment. It's a perfect combat system that's so incredibly fun to play, not because it's this crazy RPG with hugely different combat mechanics and new encounters every second, but because there's an ability to master every single tiny little detail of it. And the satisfaction of getting into a good combat encounter is still as good now as it was 20 years ago. Throughout this video, we talked a lot about commitment. We have to have Leon commit to shooting, we have to have him commit to repositioning, and succeeding in that commitment pays dividends, right? And that's what the entire game's combat system hinges on, the idea of risk versus reward. And yeah, I guess all games have a factor of risk versus reward in them, right? But Resident Evil 4 is such a stiff and mechanically tight video game that every action feels extremely important to the success of a combat encounter. Every action in the game has an air of risk around it, right? And that's what keeps the tension so high, even though Leon is just a badass. You're risking the damage of Leon by standing still, but being rewarded by damaging enemies in front of you. Like we talked about before with the shotgun, it drastically changes the pacing of combat, making it more hazardous than ever, but it pays by being the most useful attack for large groups of enemies by a country mile. You're taking a huge risk letting all these Ganados walk towards you, right? But you're paid dividends when you blast them all away in one fell swoop. The game is just constantly daring you to take risks at every corner, keeping that high of you being on the edge of your seat the entire time. Now, there's one level that I want to talk about specifically that really highlights how well risk versus reward works in this game in relation to its combat mechanics. This level, in my opinion, takes the entire identity of Resident Evil 4 and puts it on just this massive scale of a map. And it's truly one of the most frustrating and fucking annoying levels in the game. It really ramps up the difficulty, and you have to think about every action you take, because one wrong action and you gotta restart the whole thing from scratch. The castle gates.
Now there's 4 catapults circling the castle gates,
and they're all just shooting at you at the same time, and it's massive damage to Leon and pretty much instant death for Ashley. Immediately when you first enter this level, you're met with a gazebo that's destroyed by a catapult, and while it's extremely risky to go over there, because every catapult is going to shoot over there. If you do go over there, you're met with a treasure. But most of the time, you're going to get hit by a fireball just by nature of Leon not being fast enough to hit this gazebo and the first save point in time. But if you do manage to make it happen, you're rewarded with some treasure. Now, the trickiest part of this level undoubtedly is Ashley, who's just trailing behind you the whole time. You can't make her wait at the entrance because some cultists come in behind you and they can take her right out that door, failing the mission. So this level is all about juggling not getting hit by fireballs and not having cultists come in and either attack you or swoop Ashley up. Like I said, it's a fucking frustrating level, especially if you don't have a rifle. But it's perfect because it challenges you on how risky you're willing to be. And above all, it teaches you to be thoughtful about the actions you take, because one wrong move can be the end of it, starting you all the way back to the beginning. And if risk reward is the header of Resident Evil 4's combat, then thoughtfulness is a subtext. You see, the icing on the cake that makes Resident Evil 4's combat just so beautiful is the fact that there's virtually no luck in this game. Everything works on a strict timetable, and every action you take has a reward and a consequence, as we talked about before. When you put a weapon back in the attach case, it doesn't just magically reload on its own. Fuck! So when you need to use it in a tight situation later, and you forgot to reload it, there's no one to blame but yourself. Thoughtfulness goes all the way to even something as simple as inventory management, where you have to move around parts in the attach case to maximize storage and not get over encumbered. You learn pretty damn quick not to hoard guns, because what the hell is the point of having all these pistols if I don't have any place to put ammo anyway? The example of the castle gates was just one level out of many that really hones in on the vision of Resident Evil 4's mechanics. The water temple, Mendez boss fight, the 2 Garradors, all of these levels are great because they place importance on thinking one step ahead and making your actions feel like they mean something. It is truly just a special game, a game that was made when everyone involved was at the absolute peak of their creativity. A game where they had to completely redesign it within like 2 years, and still even then, nothing went wrong. A game that even 20 years after coming out, I still get the wonder and awe of game design that I don't really get much anymore. Now, this is the outro, and it's time to get a little personal, okay? I know a lot of people don't like personal stuff at the intro, so whatever, I'm slapping it on at the end. But if you couldn't tell from me rambling about one singular mechanic of this game, I absolutely fucking love Resident Evil 4. It is one of my favorite games of all time. It's one of those games that comes around once in a lifetime that you play and it completely changes the way you look at video games as a medium. You know, I've had these thoughts about this combat system since I was like 12 years old, right? Before I can even manifest what I was trying to say. I couldn't quantify why I love this combat system so much. I just knew that I loved it and there was something so mechanical about it. And that's why I still play it to this day. I mean, I was playing it for this video and I was having just as much fun as I was 5, 10, 15 years ago. Now we have to address the elephant in the room, the remake. And personally, I think something got lost in translation with the remake. Now that's not to say that I think it's a bad game, because the remake is one of my favorite Resident Evil games. I think it is a fantastic game, but it just doesn't quite hit the same as the original, I have to admit. The stiffness and just overall flow state you can get into when playing the original game is kind of just lost in the remake a little bit. Leon moves way more fluidly in the remake, right? He can actually walk side to side. He's a lot more nimble. And with that, they had to make the enemies a lot tougher to make the game fair. They don't react to shots nearly as much as they used to. And personally, I kind of just think Resident Evil 4 loses some of its identity when it doesn't have those exaggerated audible and visual reactions. All in all, I think Resident Evil 4 is just a perfect vignette in time where everything just perfectly came together. Every single puzzle piece was perfectly made, and it forms just this beautiful masterpiece of art. You know, even now, after doing all this fucking rambling, I still feel like there's just so much left unsaid about the combat in this game. It's truly one of the most remarkable things in gaming history, in my opinion. It's just such an ethereal and complex concept that I simply don't have the words to describe yet. I think this combat truly transcends just gaming. It's an absolute perfect creation of algorithms and if-then statements that even to this day can be recognized and appreciated as something truly unique and something that can't be replicated, even if you have the formula right in front of you. No matter where I'm at in life, how I'm feeling, I know I can boot up Resident Evil 4 and play it, just like riding a bike. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.